that when we switched from analog to digital, there's all this frequency space that was freed up. What do we do with it? So the FCC is trying to decide that, and they're still deciding. That was 2010. For 2013, they're still talking about it. But here's a headline from this week, July 9th, you see up there. West Virginia University, nation's first campus of super Wi-Fi turned on at West Virginia University. So they have covered that entire campus with Wi-Fi, and you say, well, there are a lot of other campuses that are Wi-Fi. What's different? So we'll get into that a little bit as we talk about this. But back, I guess it was March or April, y'all watch UNC TV. Is this how you found out about this? The white space, is this how you found out?
No.
So we had a little visit.
Yes.
We had a little visit from Kelly McHenry. She is a reporter for NC Now, if you watch this, but she gives a good overview. Pay no attention to the other woman in the video. Yeah, I hate watching myself. But she came down.
Wilmington is a national leader in digital
And did a little
technology,
video.
the first city in the nation to go all digital TV in the area, is now at the forefront of recycling those old analog TV channels. Kelly McHenry explains how those old channels are getting a new lease on life.
In Wilmington, you can go to the city park, stretch out
It's
on
a
a
county
bench,
park, by the
and
way.
get internet service for free.
We get very positive responses. Parents who come with their kids for their practices or for the playground are able to jump on our wireless, which is a higher speed than the cell phone technology is, and also it's free and not part of the plans that they have to pay for on their phones and tablets.
Wilmington is working under a special license from the Federal Communications Commission to utilize what's called white space. What is white space? Well, remember back in 2009 when we all switched off those old analog TV sets? Those channels, or radio spectrum frequencies as they're called, went dark.
Wilmington was the first city in the country to switch off all of those analog channels. So now the city is giving the green light to reuse them. That antenna is broadcasting on an old analog channel, but it's not sending out television, it's sending out internet Wi-Fi. They've set the system up in city and county parks. And the beauty is, it's not disrupted by buildings and other structures like cell phone service can be.
We find this to be very forgiving, trees and foliage, of all sorts of impediments.
They've also used it with a camera to monitor the parks for trespassers or trouble spots. Internet comes into the park through a wire at a maintenance building. From there, it's broadcast throughout the
Does
park
that
with
antenna look
antennas.
familiar to you guys?
It's not as fast as
Real
a high-speed
high-tech.
computer service, but you don't have to bury expensive cables to get Wi-Fi to remote locations, such as waterways that require monitoring by the Environmental Protection Agency.
We have quite a few tidal creeks in our area, and some of them have moderate water quality problems. So we send people out in boats really to put out sensors or sample water. And one of the members of our general public was nice enough to offer the use of his dock for our testing. So we were able to put one of the white space transmitter receiver radios on his dock and lower the sensor into the water right off the end of his dock, and in real time read the water quality back at our offices, at the county offices.
This is part of the FCC's Connect America initiative to connect 100 million households to the internet with a whopping 100 megabytes per second speeds by the year 2020. President Obama took up the charge, calling for 98% of the U.S. population to be connected to broadband by the end of the decade. Whitespace can hopefully deliver that Wi-Fi to remote places with no wired connection. In fact, the FCC is reportedly looking at setting aside some of these channels for nationwide access, especially for areas areas with lots of broadcasters already in place.
If you think about a New York City and all of the broadcasters they have there and people who already are incumbent in the channels, there's not much left over for this kind of technology. So the FCC is looking at, should they reallocate some channels nationwide for this kind of technology?
In fact, broadcasters have been the biggest critics of white space, worried that it could interfere with their signals. In Wilmington so far, Chaney says they've had no complaints about the Wi-Fi interfering with other systems. There's no doubt more Wi-Fi is needed. Cisco Systems reports worldwide mobile internet traffic grew 70% in 2012 and is nearly 12 times the amount of internet traffic generated back in 2000. With the airwaves becoming crowded with mobile users, experts say cell phone providers may one day take advantage of white space.
There are only a finite number of licensed frequencies that they're going to be able to use for their devices. So just think if they could offload some of their traffic onto these kinds of technologies, how that would free up some of their licensed spectrum.
And here's another startling statistic. Experts predict by the end of 2013, there will be more mobile devices in use than there are people on the entire planet. More than 7 billion mobile devices. With that many people trying to connect, experts say we'll need every bit of available broadband, and white space is expected to be a crucial part of that.
This technology sort of lays the groundwork for something that's been batted around called spectrum sharing. We were talking about the finite resource of spectrum. This is a way to share across communities, across boundaries, without having everybody to have their own licensed space.
So the race is on for spectrum space. If using those old analog signals proves to be a big player in Wi-Fi delivery, the industry can thank Wilmington for helping to turn white space into Wi-Fi gold.
It's a technology that has an exciting future, and I hope more people catch on to it.
More information on the Wilmington Wi-Fi project, visit our website.
So that gives you a pretty good feel or overview for what white space is a little bit about. I want to go through sort of our revolution. We talked about what they are. They're unused frequencies within the TV band, UHF and VHF. That's why the antennas look so familiar to you. Because the guys that put this in Wilmington, that's what they use. The neat thing that we saw is that this is brand new industry. So we had vendors bringing in prototype equipment and cobbling together the systems with stuff that was off the shelf. So literally the guys were going to Lowe's and Home Depot and picking stuff up when we were testing this. Or we had a Screen Gem Studios, and Screen Gem's, one of their offshoots was one of our partners for this. So they were going and getting TV components to kind of build antennas and networks when we were testing this back in the 2010, 2011 timeframe. So they're unused. We have the additional space, I've talked about it, but one of the problems with this, if you go to Best Buy and get a current home wireless router, there's a set of frequencies that's available nationwide for those, and it does some hopping and things around to find the best one, I guess, close to you, but it doesn't matter whether I take that thing to New York City or Wilmington, it's going to work. It's not that way with these white spaces. I mentioned in the video, in New York City, you've got so many broadcasters in this space already. There's very few frequencies available for the white space technology. In Wilmington, and if you just kind of wanted to see what was available in your county, there is, you can Google where's my white space or what's my white space, and you can get to a place where you put in an address and it'll tell you. You see there, we don't have a lot of broadcasts. The X's are already used. All the checks, the green and the blue, are available for this kind of technology. So those are available. Some of you who are more technical, I'll tell you a little bit about how this works, because you might be curious about that. The FCC actually licensed 3 or 4 what they call database providers. Google is one, Microsoft is one. Spectrum Bridge, whose website this came off of, was the one we worked with. They licensed these guys to provide a database of the channels that were available and not available for this technology. So they have databases of this information. When you go to put in a white space network, the first thing you have to do is set up a base radio that's into a wired connection. And it geolocates itself, so it has a little GPS in it. It knows its latitude and longitude, and it goes to the database and says, these are my available frequencies. So it is software-based. We talk about spectrum sharing, so you can take that radio somewhere else, and as long as it's made to work on any of the available frequencies, it can check the database based on where it is. It will also do a little bit of the cognition, or whatever they call it, looking for different incumbents on those channels, and look for a free one. So once you establish the base at a location, the location that was in the video is one of our parks, Hugh McRae Park, which is a county park. It makes our commissioners so upset when people say city parks, or you can thank the city of Wilmington. That's a county. Anyway, Hugh McRae Park, the base radio is on our maintenance facility, which is at the very back corner of that park. So we set up the first radio with one of those little antennas on it, and it established what channel or set of channels we would use for that location. So we put that in first. Then you go out to the location where you want to put your other radio, the other end of that point-to-point, because that's really what it is point-to-point. And you just throw up the antenna, and it finds the other radio. Now, you saw the park in the video, pine trees, all of that. We were at the height of that shelter building. No pole, no line of sight through the trees to that maintenance facility. That's one of the great things about these channels, is that they don't require a clear line of sight. Because of and if there's an engineer in here who'd like to tell us about the why, what I understand is the waves are a little more spread out, so they're a little more bendable. They can go through around trees. They're not as tight, the wave pattern, as some of the higher frequencies.
You said that you're doing point-to-point, so are people jumping in between the 2 points? Is that how? Or
No, it is a transport. Right now, there is no receiver chip for a laptop or for anything else that can take a white space signal.
Okay.
These radios right now are the only thing there. So it really is a way to get from point to point. And on the other side of the radio is a standard Ethernet PoE port. So you can put whatever on the end of it you want to.
Speed?
So speed. The first radios we put in are the ones that are still at Hugh McRae Park. They're about a T1 speed, okay, at about a mile distance. The second generation of radios that we put in, which I'll get to some of the different projects, were from another company. They had a little more time to develop, got a little bit smarter. We're getting 6 meg, and we put those in downtown in our downtown area, so building to building kind of things. We got 12 blocks, whatever that equates to, at 6 meg. And the neat thing about these channels is they don't tend to typically go away. They just, the speed degrades if you get further out and further out.
So but there's no really, you haven't really measured the attenuation on that yet, have they?
There's some, like the vendor could probably tell you from a technical standpoint what their actual, because they used to, I'm not the engineer person, I can tell you that the KTS radio, which is the radio we use that's a Meg 5, or 1.5 million. They're very tight in their band, they're a military spec, so they don't try to blast at a high power or anything like that. They're very tight, very reliable, no interference, no problems with those, but a Meg 5 is what they give you.
So you could conceivably get the same sort of range that the television market had?
Yes, at the high power, and that's one of the interesting things about the FCC's rules right now. The rules right now for these types of installations, you can only be, I think it's 30 meters above average terrain. So for us in Wilmington, that's pretty flat, right? So we can go up 30 meters, I guess that's about 90 feet. It's about as high as we can go up with an antenna. And most of these are measured in watts. If you could use this technology in the kilowatts that TVs could, yes, you could get the high speeds, very high ranges, and that's what's, I think, got people really excited about it. The argument has been from the broadcasters, they don't want interference, and keeping the power low and the height low kind of keeps it out of their space, if you will.
But would it really cause them to have much?
We have had 0 complaints. One step of our process was to advertise that we were testing. So the FCC advertised to all the broadcasters in our area. And wireless microphones in your churches and things and assembly locations also operate in this band. So anybody who had registered that they had that got a notice from the FCC that we were testing in Wilmington. And this was the complaint filing period and all of that. We got 0 complaints during our testing period.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was, we came down to
Yeah.
Wilmington to see the project, so I went back, and I think it's on the Spectrum Bridges website where you can check for channels, how many available channels in your area. And what I noticed is that there are a whole lot more channels in the rural areas than in the urban areas. And this is really important to eastern North Carolina because, it's
We're
pretty
flat.
flat and it's a bunch of foliage, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should have changed, this is not Raleigh, I changed it to Dare County. So here's where we are today, and you see all the available channels. Instead of the check marks, this one just shows available channels, and it shows the 30-meter allowable antenna height there for these radios. I will tell you, we tested another technology with our partner, and I think you may have seen this when you were down, that they are testing now in one of the school systems in North Carolina. It's called digital transmission systems. They're using actually a licensed channel in the same band with a higher power. And again, they're using the broadcast TV components, and Capital Broadcasting is also very interested in this digital transmission. The FCC on those licensed channels only allows for one-way push. But in our county, we were able to push digital content to machines, a receiver, and you can actually buy the receivers from Amazon or anywhere. It's real interesting. To a laptop or to a kid's iPad. We were able to transmit for a distance of almost 30 miles off a single 180-foot antenna. And so if you can think about a school system that needs to push digital books to their kids, you cannot build enough bandwidth in a school hardly for a classroom of 30 kids to be downloading all their content at the same time.
I know at our community college, you can't have more than 5 people on the wireless at once without the whole network coming across.
But the digital transmission technology, which is a sister technology to what we're talking about here, because it's a higher power, it's an allowable use under FCC rules. It's one-way push, though, right now. But it can push digital content. It's a constant stream of digital content. So the Capital Broadcasting's like it for things like advertising. Right? So if you're riding around in the city, you're watching their channel on your device, and you've got the DTS receiver, you might get some advertising that comes across. Those kinds of things. So it's interesting. The other thing that's coming along, I mentioned the 2nd and 6th harmonics radios that we're currently using at our detention facility for video surveillance, and I'll get to some of those in a minute, and also in that downtown area. Those are 6 meg. We also tested with the company that now did the West Virginia University campus, a company out of, I think they're out of Canada, but they actually did from one of our fire stations out to our landfill, a point-to-point 2 miles at 12 meg. Now, the guys, you talk about interference and those kind of things, they were just blasting, right? They didn't measure whether they were staying truly within the confines of their channel and that kind of thing. But the radios this guy brought to test, Adaptrum is the name of that company, were, small dorm refrigerator size. They were his prototypes. And they would, by the time they got to the West Virginia campus, as technology evolves, smaller, they're within the confines of their band. That's how that stuff kind of evolves. So if you can get 12 meg of backhaul at a 2 mile distance with no line of sight, like you're saying, just think the kinds of things you can do with that.
We have an office that's probably half a mile from our main office, and we couldn't get point to point because of the trees. We tried to VPN. The line speed was 3. And somehow the lines are run on the highway, not straight across. They go up and down. So we still can't VPN from that site. That site can't VPN into our server. So it was.
This is a technology that would
That
probably
could
be
be.
that fairly
Yeah.
simply. The half-mile range, we're doing that with no problems at all. And I say it's kind of point and shoot. You know how on some of it you've got to get it precision lined up and everything has to be just right. These guys, like I said, literally they were out there just pointing the antennas in the general direction and giving the.
When we were operating at such a low frequency, you're at an order of magnitude lower than what you're doing for Wi-Fi. You're at 2.4, 5.6, 5.4 gigahertz. That's you're in before jailbirds.
Yep.
So.
If you think about how well the old TV bands got to people's house, it's the same kind of thing.
It's weird, that office moved from town and they were fine, and they moved out to the highway and.
The KTS radios that I mentioned, KTS is Coos Technologies. They were the first company to have an FCC certified radio. So the radios we're using that started as prototypes and we've replaced them since are now FCC certified. That's been part of the interesting thing is working through that process with the FCC. I mentioned we had to advertise. That was part of KTS's certification process for those radios. The 6 harmonics radios that we're using for a couple of our other installations are undergoing the FCC process now. They're almost ready for their final certification, which as part of our agreement with them will get trade out for the new FCC certified radios.
Are you still the only county that's using?
No, I actually
Is it
have.
growing?
It's growing. I've had more and more calls. I mentioned West Virginia. That's a project that was done with the AirU group, if you've heard of AirU. Microsoft is part of that consortium. It's universities that are looking at Wi-Fi technologies. Owen Squires called me from Albemarle. He's had someone to approach him, a company from the UK called Newell, who also has radios that they're testing. It's really starting to pick up. We've had a lot of visitors. The farthest away visitor that we had was Kazakhstan. We had some guys from the Kazakhstani government come and look at our installation. They're very interested in it because they have a lot of remote rural villages in that country. And they have evidently good satellite resources. So they can't, so what they were telling me is they can get service, and they're looking mainly for voice service, but it would of course be voice over IP service, from a satellite to a center of a village, and then use the white space to propagate out from village center or village point to get some sort of service into these areas. They have nothing. no telecommunications at all in some of their areas.
The only concern that I would have is that if you're talking about rural areas, seen here in the state, is that a lot of the rural areas are rural because they're slow to adopt technology. And so even though you have not experienced any interference at those lower bandwidths, those lower frequencies, if we try to deploy this in Robeson County, where we're like 85% rural, people are gonna have their cordless phones and stuff like that that operate at 900 megahertz max and lower than that. So we'll probably see a lot more interference, probably.
You could, depending on where
Yeah.
you're trying to get
And
to.
how many channels? I mean, don't you
This is
have
true.
multiple
This is
channels
true.
that you could pull from?
Yeah, they are.
This is true.
So it would, maybe layer it or
Yeah.
whatever,
So right now it's just testing, so it's not like, base stations or,
You can actually purchase now the KTS radios. As soon as 6 Harmonics is FCC certified, they will be able to be purchased on the regular market. There are also vendors, like I mentioned with Owen Newell. We've had a vendor partner who is not an equipment manufacturer, but he's been bringing the equipment manufacturers to us, brokers, so to speak, or integrators, who will bring it to you now if you're willing to do testing. The FCC opened up that test license beyond Wilmington now, so you can get in on this technology. You just have to find a partner to
You
help
still have
you
to
do
apply
it.
for license from the FCC.
No, the license for the white space is now open for this. I think it's East Coast maybe.
Really?
For
Yeah, it's
testing.
beyond Wilmington.
for
now.
testing. No?
Or if you get an FCC certified radio, you can use it in production.
Okay.
The debate right now is about, there's a big spectrum auction that's getting
Yeah.
ready to happen. And what'll be left after that. The broadcasters really want all of it.
Right, of course, they're gonna get all of it. They probably-
But the FCC is also being lobbied by telecommunications companies. They want some of it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the Verizons and AT&Ts of the world would love to have some of this spectrum. So they're thinking about, or the FCC has to think about the greater public good too. They have not opened up a section of spectrum for shared technologies since the Wi-Fi we're using currently was opened up, which you're talking about is way up here. And they talk about the innovation that occurred when they opened that up. Think about all the things that came as a result of that. Every device now's got a chip in it that uses that. And there are a lot of folks in Washington lobbying when they do this spectrum auction to leave some common channels in this band across the United States for that kind of innovation. And I think what we've shown, or what we hope to have helped show in our trials, was that it can coexist. We can coexist in the band with these broadcasters, with these wireless microphones, and not cause problems with their transmissions. That was one of the goals of the pilots.
So what do you think the potential is in terms of maximum throughput?
Each channel, I really couldn't say. It depends on the power rules that the FCC puts behind them. I don't know what power is on traditional Wi-Fi. I will tell you that some of the radios now that are being tested do banding or bonding of multiple channels. So if you could get 2 or 3, it could be tremendous.
I just think it's great that they're using something that's left over. It's like when they go into, in the towns, these buildings are just sitting there, and it's like everybody's moved on and they're left.
Yeah. But I will say with the FCC, there's a big push to bring in money to the federal
Of
government.
course.
And selling channels is a way for them to make big money.
Sure.
So it's a political battle,
Yeah.
really.
Leslie, can you, talk about the cost of the
Is it just the hardware or is the white space itself, like folks have seen on the test, or the channels, you make the comment earlier that it's free.
The spectrum is free. The radios, what we're told, about $2,000 a piece for the radios to go on the channel.
$2,000
each.
each.
So you have to,
Have to have two.
Correct.
yes, but the base radios can have multiple spokes, so it's a hub and spoke. And some of the new radios actually mesh. So where ours, if you looked at Humacrae Park, we've got one base radio and we have 3 receiver radios on the end. The throughput of the base radio is where your limitation will be. So how many of those, how do you want to dish out your bandwidth? But the newer ones, like I said, if we put a newer base radio at Humacrae and got 6 meg, we have 2 meg per, which people would be really happy with in the park.
What are you using on the endpoints for Wi-Fi?
Just Cisco access points, and then we have, access video cameras on a lot of them too.
For the people in the park at night that are sitting there.
I will tell you too, the camera vendor that we've been working with has been so impressed with this technology
Yeah.
that he's been working with the camera manufacturer to have a chip made that's the radio that will be in the camera itself.
So it's
And
one of the same.
So that you won't have to put a radio in the camera will
It's the
feedback.
radio.
And I think you'll see more and more of that coming along. Cisco's been testing it for a long time.
So what you're saying is, so if there was a provider that wanted to use this technology to provide service to residential homes, then the radio to that house would be at that cost.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem with the consumer market right now, is that there's not an in-home device yet. If you can imagine though in the future, and some of the vendors that we've worked with have talked about this, put a consumer grade device that would go in your home, almost like your cable set-top box, but rather than having a cable coming into it, you've got an antenna, just like you had in the old days with UHF, VHF, and you can get your signal on that box.
Right now, it's strictly for backhaul.
Yeah, strictly backhaul right now. But that is coming. And I know, our vendor partner, TV Band Service, has been talking with some of the guys that do rural broadband in some of the markets, trying to get some of the companies to at least prototype that, to kind of speed it along a little bit. Wilson, they've been up in Wilson a time or two. Not the city of, the county. There are some areas of Wilson that do need it, the rural areas outside of the cities.
And that antenna's gonna get smaller too.
Yes. Well, you saw the receiver antenna that we used for most of those,
Yeah.
it's actually a wireless mic antenna, and then the other's just a basic television, UHF, VHF television. So they're cheap components. That's another thing that is appealing about this. The chips themselves are just repurposed,
So,
kind of television receiver chips. It's kind of cool.
what about any security concern?
You can put whatever kind of encryption or whatever you want to send through that call. It's just like point to point, you can do whatever you want to on the bandwidth you have.
Well, you might do that, but nobody can get in that space, right?
Yes, good.
You have to put
Everybody
Everybody can get it.
everybody, yeah.
It's free space.
Yeah.
All right.
So you put your VPN on it or your point to point, whatever kind of encryption protocol you want to put on. We're renting some of our infrastructure. I mentioned we're paying, a couple $100 a month for them to put it prototyped for the radios, and the company that we've dealt with has been working on them for us, putting all the new firmware upgrades, because firmware upgrades, as people are working on them, are coming out all the time. And then the final stage for us is to get them traded out with the FCC certified radios, which we'll then purchase for the couple $1,000 a piece.
So since you guys were at the ground floor of this, where do you see it in Wilmington, New Hampshire County in 5 years?
So, let me tell you about where we're using it and where we see using it a lot. Outdoors. Airlie Gardens, if you've never been to Airlie Gardens, it's a place that's just beautiful, right? They will not let us dig up
No.
Airlie Gardens to put in fiber. And if we did, they're always digging a new bed out there, or putting in some irrigation that we have to worry about. Well, they wanted surveillance because they actually have problems with people coming on the property for years, and we've not been able to give it to them. So this is the cause they didn't want us digging up. You know, or we would have to put in mesh or high towers, which they also didn't have right. The aesthetic had to be right.
That's right.
So if you look at Early Gardens now, if you went there, you would probably, other than the antennas that are on the Garden Facilities Center, you probably wouldn't even notice our equipment. Because it's nestled in with the trees and things. So we have 4 surveillance cameras at Early Gardens up in the front part where they can watch. It's interesting because I can get to them from my laptop, and I sometimes watch the Friday night Fairly Long concert. Don't have to be there and watch all the people, it's quite humorous. And the Early Garden party that goes along with the Azalea Festival, I can comment on the hats and the dresses and things from a farm. Jim McCrae Park, you saw we have public wireless there and video surveillance. Veterans Park, we have both. Veterans Park is another one that, the only issue we had with that, we had a metal backstop for a baseball stadium that we had to do a little bit of jiggering around. That was the only impediment we ever had was with the metal chain link backstop. But we were able to go up just a little bit higher and make that work. Our detention center, quite interestingly, when they put in the detention center, the cameras were all in the facility. They didn't put anything outside. So the guys there, of course, wanted to be able to see coming into the facility. They wanted to look back on the facility, wanted to see the woods, even though it's swamp, and I don't know who's going to swim through the swamp to get to
Anybody
them.
trying to get out of it is.
So in and out, so we were able to put that up there, and those have been working great. They love them.
They don't have fence there?
They do.
They didn't?
We didn't have a problem with those. It wasn't as high up though as the that backstop.
Right.
So we just put, actually our parks people got to be really good at putting these just standard poles up. And so they just put little poles up for the detention guys and put power to them, and that's all we required. This is just a standard telephone pole with those. The youth enrichment zone is the area downtown I was talking about. One of our schools gave their whole 6th grade class iPads. It was an underprivileged area of town. And what they found was most of the kids, when they left schools, had no internet access at home. Well, our main library is downtown, but that was all indoor access. There are a couple of city parks, so this was a city-county project that we did, where we put just Cisco wireless access points in a couple of the city parks and used county and city facilities as the base for those. So we had our Cape Fear Museum, we put a base station there, and we serve the Martin Luther King Center, which is a basketball facility. They've got wireless there. Outdoor at the Hemingway Center, Portia Hines Park, and I cannot remember the other one, in the other communities. So the kids, when they leave in the afternoons, there are these hot spots in there.
So they can take their iPad home.
They do. They do. And the school system, we run our wireless through our standard filtering like we use for the libraries. So they get that level of filtering, and then the school system has their own net nanny stuff on the iPad beyond that. So the kids are able to go to those spots and use their equipment, even if they don't have it at home. Now, eventually, it would be nice to have a home device you could hand them to take home with them to get the white space, and that's where I think that technology will evolve to. The other interesting thing at one of the conferences I went to early on about this, you had the Nokias of the world there and the Samsungs of the world were at this conference. They're watching this very closely, the handset manufacturers. What they would like to see is a chip that adds this as a band. So you've got Wi-Fi and the cellular bands already in your phone.
Yeah.
You add the white space as another band possibility. I mentioned offloading from their licensed frequencies. If they could offload, the guys that were talking to me, if they could just offload the download portion to a white space kind of frequency, if you were within range, it would take so much traffic off of their stuff they're having to pay for. So they're looking at this very heavily. And as I mentioned, you can go on Amazon and actually buy receivers for these frequencies that will receive data transmissions. That's what's being tested with the digital transmission systems that we talked about earlier.
Do you know if the ship has light space technology on it?
The battleship, we haven't done anything with the battleship, so not that I'm aware of. We did a lot of tests early on. I mentioned the water quality. So when we were doing the FCC testing and the proof of concept, these are actual live installations. We did test installations. We've got fire stations all over the county. In New Hanover County, we recently took over our volunteer fire departments with paid staff, so they're all county facilities now. We have Metro Ethernet at all of those fire stations. So we got a 10-meg connection at every fire station. Up in Porter's Neck, which is up towards my friends in Pender County, Porter's Neck, we have a fire station up there. We also have a lot of tidal creek, right, and waterways up in that area that aren't too great. So our guys who were out with their baling wire and their antennas knocked on a guy's door and asked him could they try something out. He just thought it was the coolest thing. And he said, yeah. He said, here's where you can plug it up. And he let us go on the end of his dock. So we went on the end of his dock, and they put up one of those little antennas like you see, just right on the railing of his dock, and dropped the water quality monitor thing into the water off the end of there. And we had a fire station that was about 1.5 miles away. So you're at dock level, fire station on the eaves of the fire station, 1.5 miles away, and we were able to read that water quality monitor back in our office, which was really nice, a really nice usage. No repeater, no nothing, no line. We couldn't even see the fire station, you know, from where we were. And that was in the prototypes, you know, if we went back now. But, and you know, that's what I think Owensley had is SCADA type technologies. If you look at SCADA type things, this is great for that, because even the low bandwidth radios are plenty for those kind of applications. You don't have to worry about any special poles, antennas, those kinds of things. So that was great. I'm trying to think if there's any other, the guys, it was interesting, we talked to the guys that run the Cape Fear Bridge in CDOT, was interested in using it to put a camera up in the controls up at the top of the bridge. They have a bridge tender there. So there's a guy that sits up there and tends the bridge, but if he has a problem with the bridge, they have to wait for an engineer to come. And they were saying if we put a camera in the top of the bridge that's trained on the control panel, I can talk to my guy and tell him exactly what to do based on what he was seeing, you know, from that. They didn't get around to doing that. I think the state sometimes, I'm not putting on stuff around, but I think the state sometimes moves a little slower than we do at the local level. So they didn't get around to getting into our test, but that was a test case that they had. We also put traffic cameras out with the city of Wilmington. So traffic cameras were an easy application, easy use of this. And the neat thing is you can take it down and move it, you know, and you don't have to have an engineer and a propagation study and all of that.
So you've used a lot of your channels, a lot of your,
Well, the thing is,
is there
they're
a lot left? Or?
Because they're lower power, think about it, you can reuse them from spot to spot. We can use the same channels down at our Veterans Park that we're using up at Human Cray Park.
Oh.
You can reuse them.
So, has there been any talk between the county and other municipalities in the county about possibly, I guess, piggybacking maybe would be the word?
Or sharing?
So we already work with the city of Wilmington on a lot of this. I mentioned our youth enrichment zone. We put one of the base station antennas on the Wilmington Police Department, so our city partners, and all of the hotspots are city facilities, because that youth enrichment zone is right in downtown Wilmington, or just a little north of where we are at the Hilton in downtown Wilmington. So that area is predominantly city stuff. The county didn't have any assets there. We had our courthouse and our museum downtown, so we had a point of presence to start from, if you will, but then we used the facilities to put the hotspots on. So we have done a lot of partnering on this. And they're actually looking at adding it to a couple of their parks as well. They've got a new tennis center that's open. Anywhere you have to go outdoors, it's just simple.
Why wouldn't any city or county want to use this? It's wonderful.
It is a neat technology. I think part of it is it's new, it's brand new, and you can't go to Amazon or to CDWG and buy a radio right now. Cisco doesn't make one yet.
That might be a good thing, though. You know,
Yeah.
they don't have the market on it, because they will.
The other interesting thing about working with a new technology like this, and I saw this with cable modems back in the 90s. You know, we were in Johnston County, we were one of the first to use cable TV for data. It was before Roadrunner and before all that stuff. And the first radios we got from a company called Land City, were this high. They were cable modems, we got 10 meg out of them. The next ones we got, Land City was bought by DEC. We got a box that sat on the table about this big and this big. And then you know where we are now with Roadrunner and the little cable modems being so small. This will be the same way. What's, again, an interesting thing is to look at these companies. If you look at Spectrum Bridge, I mentioned Spectrum Bridge and Coos Technologies, they're two companies that have partnered on the radio and database side.
What's the other one's name?
Coos, KTS, KOOS, yeah. It's the FCC certified radio. If you look at the CEOs of those companies, they are CEOs who have made a history of positioning companies for acquisition. So you look at,
So it's gonna wind up to Cisco anyway.
and when have you ever known Cisco to develop something from scratch? So that's where I see it go, and I see the six harmonics, the companies we've been dealing with will be rolled into an HP radio or a Cisco or whatever. As they get FCC certification and any patents that they need, they're going to be gobbled, and this will become commodity market kind of equipment.
Well, what about when the FCC, decides and starts regulating? I mean, could they pull from your test?
Yeah, that's the risk you take early on.
That's the risk.
And one of the reasons we've been working with a third party is they are kind of keeping their ear to the ground with the FCC for us.
Yeah.
So we sort of know that there will be some spectrum available for this. And I mentioned we're releasing the radios until they get FCC certification.
Yeah.
Because if the FCC certifies it, they have a vested interest in making sure it's going to work. Where the prototypes, we felt like, we don't want to sink, thousands of dollars into equipment. But the companies were willing to put it with us for testing as part of their.
But testing is open, you said. So
It is now, and that's what I think Newell, the company I mentioned that has approached, I guess, Albemarle is open. His government are out of the UK.
Yeah.
They don't have many US pilots going. And these guys have found the governments to be friendly, universities, and those kind of folks, to be friendly hosts for these kind of trials.
So how much did matching funds did you get from your business partners with this?
So up until the last year, we haven't paid a dime.
Oh my goodness.
So they sent people, sent radios, and then I was saying we're paying a couple $100 a month per site to lease the equipment until it gets FCC certified, and then we'll talk about buying neat thing about the leasing is if one of my radios were to go offline or goes offline, I send that company out there.
Oh.
So go check on that. And you know, it's funny, out at Airly Gardens, 9 times out of 10, it's because they cut power to the pole.
Oh. And
They
also,
see a radio.
if you're leasing, when it's, the newer comes out, you can just,
Yeah, we
replace
we have
instead
a
of-
whole new round of the 6 harmonics radios coming in the next couple of weeks
Instead
that
of
are the
purchasing.
FCC certified. Yeah. I talked about cost, future applications. Our mobile command post, that's an interesting one too, with our emergency management guys. They have a portable antenna, so you could put a radio and an antenna on top of that. If they could point it back towards one of our county facilities. We actually talked about at one point putting a hub radio on every one of those fire stations because they provide a pretty good coverage if you think about coverage areas around fire stations. Then you take the mobile command post out, and if you can point that antenna at one of the base radios that's already homed in, like I mentioned, it will make a connection back to that and provide, you know, that internet within that trailer. Fireground connection is the same thing, but not as high up, but I like, have you seen those little portable repeater things that they take out for radio systems for like their 800 megahertz? Something like that, same concept there for fire departments or on-scene kind of technologies. That's what we're doing. Anything else, you guys, about that? I've got too much stuff on my desktop.
I was gonna say, you know, that all
Look at
those.
the others.
We kinda go around and say, you shouldn't have all those.
No, you know what that is?
Make a folder,
I see
Leslie.
a lot of reimbursements on it.
Well, you know what it is? The reimbursement they looked at, this is a side story, but we do cell phone reimbursements. We don't issue county-issued stuff. We started that when the IRS said it was taxable. They changed their mind not long ago, I guess, and decided, nah, maybe it's not taxable anymore. And so I have one of those spreadsheets for each department that does reimbursements, comparing the cost of the reimbursements to going back to county supplied cell phone.